To another Safety Academy webinar. My name is Anthony Chamont. I'm going to give you a quick overview here of the Tampa Bay Traffic Safety Local Area Traffic Safety Academy in LATSA webpage. This is the go-to location for any information for the upcoming webinars. The current webinar information is posted here along with the registration link if you did not register through the survey that went up prior to the presentation. All upcoming webinars are posted here on the right. The prior webinars, PowerPoints, and the recordings of the presentations are posted in this section of the web page, and down at the very bottom in the resources is the PDH request form. So with that, I will send it over to Dennis for the official introduction.
And is my screen showing?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. My name is Dennis Falloon. For those that are new to this webinar and those that have been here before involved with the webinar, welcome to everybody. I am the District 7 Safety Academy Coordinator and a District 7 Consultant, and I'd like you enjoy this 10th topic of the second series of the safety webinars. And this is for 2014, and today we're going to hear about the basics of traffic signal operations by Larry Hagan, who's PE, and also a District 7 safety consultant. Before he presents, I wanted to just go through a brief presentation here, slideshow, to show you some things about the Traffic Safety Academy. Its basic purpose is to provide information for the local agencies to enhance their programs regarding safety-related issues. The webinar began in March of 2014. We have a time set aside from 10 to 12 each time we have them, and this second series of webinars will end at the last webinar topic will be on December 10th, 2014. We go a minimum of 1 hour and no more than 2 hours, and within that time frame we also have Q&A, questions and answers, and times for any other issues that might come up related to the topic. And as Anthony had mentioned earlier, there's a place that you can go, and I've listed it here to register under SurveyMonkey. Also, the web page he showed you is tampabaytrafficsafety.com. And also the recordings are on that same website. So like today, I mentioned we're doing the basics of traffic signal operations by Larry Hagan, and you can see the next two that are remaining, November 19th and December 10th. You can see the topics. What the heck? Oh, sorry. You can download the PhD form. Larry Hagan will take care of that for you if you are PE. And then this is the link that's on the web page for the form. And I also want to mention for those of you that are qualified for the AICP credits, you need to go to the appropriate website, and some of these have already been approved. So you need to just go check that out to get those credits. The other thing I want to mention is the third series, the safety topics that are under consideration, and they will be coming out sometime in the near future. And if you need to get a hold of me, you can either call me or send me an email. And with that, I want to turn it over to Larry Hagan.
All right, while we transition presenters here, let's do that quick poll to find out how many folks are in the room with you. Give everyone a few minutes to vote on this. All right, and let's close the poll here. It should show us the response. Looks like a vast majority of the people are in there by themselves, but we have some that are in conference rooms as well. It's nice to see people gathering together on these topics. And Larry, the show's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Let's take it sweet time. There we go. All right, well, welcome to the basics of traffic signal operations. This is just going to be real basic signal operation stuff. We're not going to get deep into any of the details of it. It's just going to really cover the basics, but I hope it'll be useful information for everyone here. Some of the things that we're going to cover, we're going to look at some of the basic terminology and some of the different aspects of how traffic signals operate and why they operate that way. Again, I like to begin with my disclaimer, and my disclaimer basically says, again, you're not going to be an expert at traffic signals at the end of this. Don't consider yourself an expert at traffic signals at the end of this. Basically, you're going to have some basic information, and again, what I'm really trying to accomplish is give you some walking around knowledge of why signals operate the way they do, and so you have some rudimentary understanding of lingo and that kind of stuff. So that is the goals for the session: the basic terminology of traffic signals, the basics of how they operate, and we'll talk about some of the parameters considered in determining the appropriate operation at a particular location, why they operate differently at one place from another. So that's what I really want to focus on today. And again, if you're a signal timing guru, you probably will sleep through this whole thing. If you've been designing and operating signals for many, many years, you're probably not going to learn anything new. But if you've been doing some transportation work and never really done design or never really operated with a maintaining agency in a signal shop or something like that, hopefully this will be useful information for you. Traffic signal meets the requirements for a traffic control device. I'm sure this was covered in the last session. I had to miss it, but I'm sure when they talked about the requirements for traffic control devices, these 5 requirements are straight out of the MUTCD, and a traffic signal does fulfill a need. It should command the attention of the users. The meaning should be clear and simple, green, yellow, red, pretty simple. It should command your respect, because if you violate one of those indications, the consequences can be pretty severe. And if the signal is designed and operated properly, it gives you time to respond. So, this is the basics of any traffic control device, and they certainly do apply to traffic signals. Different types of traffic signals, the basics we're going to look at today: pre-timed control, sometimes known as fixed time control. So fixed time or pre-timed control, where the duration of your reds, greens, and yellows are predetermined. They're fixed. They don't change from cycle to cycle. They're constant throughout certain periods of the day. Pre-time signals are still in use. Many of the signals that you drive around from place to place are the next type, which is actuated. But in downtown Tampa, for instance, and in many downtown areas, they will still use pre-time control. The other type we're going to talk about today is traffic actuated control, and this is where the duration of the green intervals can change from cycle to cycle according to how much vehicle demand is actually detected out there on the road. And we'll talk a lot about that as we go through this. The other one that's commonly used is semi-actuated control, which is really a hybrid of the two, and it's used primarily in corridors where you're trying to coordinate signals so that you have coordination between adjacent signals. We're not going to get into much coordination today. That's a little deeper than the basics of traffic signals, but hopefully you'll be able to understand how that can progress, or maybe we'll do one, if someone would like it, in the third series. If someone's interested in a seminar on coordination of traffic signals, just send in a request for that, and we could probably do that. Some of the advantages of traffic signals: they can provide for the orderly movement of traffic, and typically they will reduce frequency of certain types of crashes. Right angle collisions in particular, signals should reduce the frequency of those types of crashes. They can be coordinated to provide continuous movement of traffic, as I was talking about, and they can facilitate the full use of the available capacity. Now you'll see I used a lot of words that are kind of loosey-goosey, if you will. They can provide for the orderly movement of traffic, but they can only achieve that goal if they're properly operated and maintained and the things are working the way they should. They can be coordinated, but again, you have to make sure that you have good detection and all the things are in place to have coordination. And facilitating the full use of the available capacity, again, same kind of thing. It can be done as long as you stay on top of operating and maintaining your signals properly and appropriately. Some of the disadvantages of traffic signals: they can increase delay. You may have higher delay at a signalized intersection than if you had a different control type. If you had two-way stop control or a roundabout or something like that, the signal may actually have higher delay than other control types. They may increase the frequency of some crash types, and typically they do. When you go from stop control to signal control, typically you see an increase in crashes. Particularly your rear-end collisions tend to go up. And so typically when you put in a traffic signal, it will increase the frequency of some crash types. The signal may reduce the capacity intersection. Again, a different type of control may have higher capacity and may have better operating parameters than a signal. But sometimes you need to do it for safety or other reasons. And a signal does require maintenance and power. You do have to make sure that your detectors are detecting, and the signal is burning electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And back before they were using LED signals, a typical intersection would have however many traffic signals indications burning at the same time. Let's say you had 10 traffic signal heads that were burning. Each bulb was a 135 watt bulb, and so if you've got 10 signals burning, you're consuming 1,350 watts of power every single hour of the day, and so you very quickly start running through a whole lot of kilowatt hours of electricity, and you have a very large power bill to keep all of your traffic signals burning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and some agency has to pay that. Now many of the signal indications are LEDs. Power consumption has gone way down, but still you're burning a lot of electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at every single signal. And so somebody's paying that power bill, so that there is an ongoing maintenance cost. Talking now about pre-time control versus actuated control. Pre-time control, it's really easy to coordinate with other intersections, again, because your green times, your yellow times, all red times are fixed and they're not going to change. So it's really easy to keep them coordinated. They typically handle large pedestrian volumes. Again, one of the places you see a lot of pre-time control is in downtown areas where you have a lot of pedestrians moving around in downtown. And so pre-time control really works very well with that. And with pre-time control, you don't need detectors, so therefore it costs a lot less, and your maintenance is a lot less, because one of the things that you have to constantly stay on top of as a maintaining agency is detection, making sure if you have loop detectors that your loops are operating properly, and if you have push buttons for the pedestrians, make sure they're operating the way they should. So much more maintenance on actuated control than pre-time. So higher maintenance costs, and again, your capital cost to set them up is a lot higher in the actuated than in pre-time. The advantages really of actuated control, where you have a lot of fluctuation in your traffic demand, you get they're really best for that, where you have a lot of fluctuation in traffic demand, because again, they adapt the green time to where traffic is detected. You get much greater efficiency where you have complex intersections, with a lot of strange movements, or you've got more than 4 legs to an intersection. Certainly they give you much greater efficiency at that kind of thing. And they work very well where you have one big major arterial and fairly minor side streets. And the last bullet here, do not need to flash at night. Many agencies used to flash their signals at night. Most of them have gotten away from it now, again, because of LED signals and other things. Again, you were burning every single signal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One of the things that drove agencies to operate intersections in flash mode at night, there's not much traffic out there, and putting it in flash, you only burn half as much power as you do when everything's operating. But there really are a lot of safety implications of doing that, and they found really that all the signals really should operate 24/7 because the safety implications of not operating green, yellow, red at night really outweigh the cost savings. Some of the real basic signal timing parameters, and really these can apply to either pre-timed or actuated. The real basic signal timing parameters we're going to look at are the cycle length, what is a phase, the intervals at the intersection, and I'll talk a little bit just briefly about split and the offset. These are some of the terms you commonly hear. A cycle is the amount of time it takes to display all the vehicle movements and all the other things that are going to go on at the intersection. So if we go around the circle, the time it takes to display phase 1 and phase 2 at this signal is the cycle length. That's what's referred to as the cycle length. And so that's what the cycle is. It's the amount of time to display all the movements and then get back around and start over again. This is a real simple signal operation in DOT. The DOT label on this is SOP1, or Signal Operating Plan Number 1. It's a two-phase signal. You have the first phase is east-west, and then second phase for north-south traffic, and then you come back around and start east-west again. So this is real simple. It would be called a two-phase operation, or SOP1, and it's very simple operation, and you do see it at a lot of intersections around, again, fairly minor intersections, but it's real simple two-phase operation. Now within a phase, this is a north-south phase, it's a green phase, you can see, and in our north-south green phase, there's a bunch of different intervals that make up the phase. In this case, for the vehicles, there is a green portion of the phase, the green interval, where the signal is green, and then that's followed by yellow, and then a short all-red time. For the pedestrians in this phase, if pedestrians are operational with this phase, there's a walk time, a certain period of walk time where the what it's called is lunar white is the color, and lunar white pedestrian is illuminated, and then it goes to a flashing don't walk, or it's the flashing hand that you see, which is the pedestrian clearance time. And then at the end of the pedestrian clearance time, the flashing don't walk, there is a steady don't walk period that typically coincides with the yellow and all red. And so these things here at the bottom, the green, yellow, all red for the vehicles, the walk, flashing don't walk, and steady don't walk for the pedestrians, those intervals make up the phase. And then you take the phases made up of all those different intervals, and again, here's our east-west phase with its associated vehicle and pedestrian intervals, and our north-south phase with its associated vehicle and pedestrian intervals. You add all those things together, and that is the cycle. So the intervals make up the phase, the phases make up the cycle, and that's how those things relate and tie together. We see a lot of pedestrian countdown displays now, and they typically are on during the flashing don't walk. I believe this video you'll see the pedestrian hand flashing. That's the flashing don't walk is the flashing hand, and then the pedestrian countdown tells you how many seconds of flashing hand you have before you get the steady hand. Then after the steady hand shows up for a little while, eventually it'll start over, start with the walking man, and then go back to flashing don't walk, the flashing hand. Right, one of the terms I talked about is the split. You'll hear that term used, and basically the split is just the proportion of the cycle length assigned to each phase, usually expressed as a percentage. And so, and what I'm showing here on the screen, you see phase 1 has a split of 38%. And typically when you're putting out the splits like that, it's the sum of the green plus the yellow and all red clearance and change intervals at the end. So the split is, again, just something, what proportion of the pie, the cycle length, is given to each particular phase. So that's real simply what the split is. The other parameter you often hear about is the signal offset. And the offset is talking about the relationship in one signal to adjacent signals. That's really a coordination parameter when you're trying to coordinate signals. So again, we're not going to deep into signal offsets, but let's say you had 4 signals on an arterial. If the first signal had an offset of 20, the second signal had 37 as an offset, the third signal has 42 seconds as an offset, and the fourth signal has 10 as an offset. That means that, whatever point in the cycle, typically the offset is referenced to the end of the main street green, the major street, the end of green on the main street. And so if the end of Main Street green is the beginning of yellow on the main street. And so if signal number 1 has an offset of 20 and signal number 2 has an offset of 37, that means 17 seconds after the first intersection goes yellow, the second intersection will go yellow. And if the third intersection was 42, and again, the first intersection is 20, that means you have 22 seconds from the first signal to the third signal going yellow. And so anyhow, that's traffic signal offset in a nutshell, what it's all about. Again, it's a parameter used for coordinating signals. You hear that term used a lot, but again, we're not going to dive deep into coordination at all. Okay, so we talked about pre-time control. Traffic actuated control adjusts the green time continuously based on the demand that's detected. And it really doesn't matter what type of detection it is, whether it's video detection or loop detectors, or there's all kinds of other things, microwaves, magnetometers, and you name it, any kind of detection can be used. And so the actuated controller just adjusts the amount of green time based on the demand that's detected out there. And if a particular movement is not detected, if the detectors aren't registering any vehicles on the approach, then a phase can be skipped. You don't have to go the left turn phase if there's nobody sitting out there on the left turn loop. And so, again, that's one of the benefits of actuated control. You're not giving time away to people that don't need it. If there's nobody there, they're not getting any green time, and so time's not wasted. It can be given to movements that need it. Some of the control parameters for an actuated controller are listed here on the screen: the yellow, the all red time, and then you need, for an actuated controller, what's called a minimum, an extension or gap interval, and then you put in a maximum. And I'll show you what those are all about. Okay, when you start an actuated phase, if a vehicle has been detected, it starts a minimum time period. Typical values of the minimum are like 7 seconds. So you get a 7-second green if one vehicle is detected. And then after the minimum, the controller is counting down the minimum. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and so forth. When it gets 0, typically they will then count one extension period down. So if the extension was 3, it starts, once it reaches 0 for the minimum, it goes back and starts immediately at 3 and starts counting down from 3, 2, 1, so forth. Then every time a vehicle is detected, it starts back at 3. So it's counting down here 3, 2, and 3, goes back and resets to 3, and starts counting down again, 3, 2, and so forth. And as another vehicle gets detected, it again goes back and starts at 3 and starts counting down again. So as vehicles get detected, it's counting down 3, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, and so forth, as it just keeps adding 3 more seconds after a vehicle runs over the detector and gets detected. So vehicles keep getting detected. As long as the vehicle runs over the detector, the last millisecond of it counting down 3, 2, 1, as long as that vehicle gets there before it hits 0, it adds another 3 seconds. And so as we keep adding these 3-second times, the amount of green time is getting stretched in those 3-second increments. Again, it's based on the value you put in for that extension. But as you keep extending, vehicles are detected as they run over the detector or detected on video. If you reach a place where there's a greater than 3-second gap, so it counts down 3, 2, 1. When it gets to 0, it says, okay, there's nobody else coming. I can now give green time to somebody else, and that's what's called a gap out. The signal gaps out because there is a greater than 3-second gap between vehicles being detected. So in this case, as shown here, it counted down 3, 2, 1, 0. It immediately shows the yellow, followed by the all red, and once it reaches the point where it goes to yellow, the controller is deciding who's going to get green next. That's where the controller makes the decision who's next. And so if you've probably seen this, I know I've seen it many times, you arrive at the loop, and you arrive at the loop, and you arrive just after the last millisecond of green. You arrive just at the beginning of yellow. And you're not going to be detected. You're not going to be extended because you got there after the last second of yellow. And so if you arrived at an intersection where you see what the side street indication is, and you pull up to the left turn lane, if you get there just after it goes yellow, pull up in the conflicting left turn lane, you're not going to get your arrow. And so I know that's happened to me many times, but anyhow, that's how the signal is operating, how the traffic signal controller is thinking about this the phase that's going. So it's extended based on those detections. If you get too big a gap between vehicles, it's going to gap out. Now the other way that you end an actuated phase is what's called a max out. One of the parameters we talked about you put in is what's called the maximum. And what you see on the screen now, it's extended, 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 and there's still lots of vehicles coming. But you've given the controller for each phase what the maximum amount of green time is. So in this case, the controller is thinking, well, gosh, there's still traffic there, but I've got other phases that need some time too. We don't want to stack up traffic for miles and miles on other phases by continuing to extend this one phase. So I'm going to cut you off here. I'm maxing out. I've reached the maximum I can give you. I'll come back to you next time around the cycle. And so again, that's the two ways you end an actuated phase, is either gapping out or maxing out. And on the screen you see a max out condition. The thing that's on the screen now is, this is called SOP10, a much more complicated scenario for signal operation, but you see a lot of major intersections operating like this. And the major intersections, you'll see the left turns will come up first, and then if one direction has more left turn demand than the other, it may go into one of these phases here called the overlap phase. So in this case, if we have a westbound left turn that's real heavy, okay, we'll perhaps go to this westbound overlap and then show the westbound and eastbound throughs, and then the process starts all over for northbound and southbound. North-south lefts, maybe the northbound left is a little heavier, so it'll show this, and then we see north-south throughs here. And so, like I said, this is standard signal operating plan number 10. SOP10 is what it's called, or also known as dual ring 8-phase fully actuated control. And so I'm going to try to make this simple and help you understand how controllers operate that are implementing this type of actuated control. All right, on the screen now you should see the dual ring 8-phase fully actuated control in the way that the controller is thinking about it, the way the controller thinks about it. And if you grab hold of this concept, you really understand why controllers do some of the things they do. This is called ring 1 across the top. Phases 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's ring 1. And the bottom 5, 6, 7, and 8, that's ring 2. Those phases make up ring 2 in the typical dual ring 8-phase fully actuated control. So again, on the bottom is ring 2, on the top is ring 1. And these red things drawn in here are what's called the barrier. And the way that the dual ring controller is set up, anything on the top can operate at the same time as anything on the bottom as long as you stay on the same side of the barrier. And so, for instance, phase 1 can operate with either phase 5 or phase 6. Phase 1 in our situation here is the westbound left turn, and westbound left turn and eastbound left turn can operate typically together, no conflict there. Likewise, the westbound left turn can also operate with the westbound through. Again, no conflict there at all. And so, 1 can operate with either 5 or 6, and likewise 2 can also operate with either 5 or 6. And so as long as we stay on the proper side of the barrier, we have no conflict with either of the things we're displaying in ring 1 or either of the things we're displaying in ring 2. Then you cross the barrier together. The process starts all over, again with our north-south. The north and south lefts can operate together, and the northbound left and the northbound through can operate together. And so either one of the ones in ring 1 can operate with either of the ones down here in ring 2, again, as long as we stay on this side of the barrier, and then the process just starts all over again. And so the way the dual ring 8-phase fully actuated controller works is for each one of these phases, in ring 1, ring 2, or either one of these phases in ring 1 or either one of these phases in ring 2, that process that we just described, where you time out a minimum and then the extension in this just keep extending based on vehicles being detected, happens here in ring 1 and happens down here in ring 2. And so this one's timing out those, the extension rules 3, 2, 1, 0. And when it gets to 0, it can move on to 2. This one may still be 3, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, and so forth. This one still may be adding more extensions. This one gaps out and goes to 2. This one eventually will gap out or max out and then go to 6. And so that's how you get the operation that we just displayed there. So let me run through an example of this. Let's say we have eastbound and westbound left turns have some demand, but the eastbound is heavier, and we have absolutely no southbound demand at all, but 1 vehicle for the northbound left and 5 vehicles for the northbound through. So if that's the scenario at this particular intersection for this particular cycle, what is it going to look like out on the field? What's it going to look like to people sitting there, as a driver at the intersection? Well, we said we had both eastbound and westbound left turns having some demand, so they're being detected. Again, it doesn't matter, loop detection, video detection, whatever. So the eastbound and westbound lefts will start up. The lighter direction will gap out, and so again, the eastbound left will continue. We said it was heavier, so eastbound continues, westbound gapped out, and then the eastbound through will start because the westbound left had gapped out, and so that's what will occur then. And then once the eastbound left either gaps out or maxes out, we'll have the east-west through operation. Now we said we had no southbound demand at all, but we had some for the lefts and some for the throughs, so the northbound left turn and through will come on together, satisfy the demand, and then we start it over again with the next cycle. The next cycle might have completely different conditions. So this is what happens on one cycle at this fully actuated intersection. So again, as the controller is thinking about this and as the controller is processing this, we started with 1 and 5 because we had demand on both directions for the left turns, and then 1 gapped out. So then 5 is still counting down, 1 gaps out, so we start displaying 5 plus 2, the left turn that is eastbound and the through that is eastbound. Eventually 5 is going to gap out or max out, and we'll be displaying east-west throughs 2 and 6. And then as we get ready to cross the barrier, we said we had nothing southbound, but we had northbound lefts and throughs being detected, so we would then start up 3 and 8, because we would skip 7 since nobody detected there, and so we just start 3 and 8. And after they ran it for a little bit, we have nothing being detected for 4. So 3 and 8 run, and then we cross the barrier and start it over again. And so the next cycle could be something completely different. And so let's look at what might happen in the next cycle. So let's say the next cycle, eastbound and westbound lefts are very heavy, and eastbound through is heavy too. Let's say we have no southbound left demand, but we have northbound lefts. Northbound and southbound throughs do have demand. And so let's see what that does. And again, let me emphasize just, again, this shows all the possibilities, what you have in the situations here in the middle on both sides of the barrier, which again, the barrier would be in here, this is what's called typically an overlap phase. It's an or condition. You'll either have, from the situation where the lefts are together, but before we get to the throughs being together, you may have one left heavier than the other, so you may see this, or you might see that one, or you might just go straight from lefts to throughs at the same time, especially if the lefts are both really heavily demanded and they both max out. You typically have the same max for both east and west lefts. And so it could be the top one, could be nothing, or it could be the bottom one, but it's an or condition between one of those 3 choices for both the east-west and the north-south. All right, so in the example we just gave, let's look at what would happen here. We had eastbound and westbound lefts very heavy, eastbound through heavy also, no southbound left demand, but we have northbound lefts and northbound and southbound throughs do have demand. And so what we end up with is this sequence of phases out there on the street, if you will, where we had, again, eastbound lefts max out. We said they're heavy. And so then we go to the throughs. Then we had northbound left and throughs. We didn't have any southbound demand in the left turns, but we did have southbound throughs. So then we have north-south throughs run together. So that's how it would show up, on this cycle in the street. And again, just walking through it, again, we started with 1 and 5. We had left turn demand in both east and west directions, and then they maxed out. And so we go, from 1 to 2, and from 5 to 6. And we have our east-west throughs, and then we start 3, and we say we had no southbound left demand, so we skip 7 and go with 8, 3 and 8. And again, each one of those phases is doing all the 3, 2, 1 extensions and so forth. They're doing their thing. 3 ends, and we then have 4 and 8, the northbound, southbound throughs. And then we start it all over again, start the next cycle, and again, you might get something a little bit different the next time around. All right, well, how do we choose what signal phasing we want at a particular intersection? Why do some operate differently from others? And, on what basis do we make those choices? Well, as I said there, it's really all about the left turns, or typically one of the main drivers is the left turns. And the thing you see on the screen now, looking at safety, efficiency, and the traffic volumes. 3 different things to consider, and they help you decide which is the appropriate type of left turn protection that you want to implement at the intersection. And so it's one of the things we have to balance as traffic engineers. Do we want to promote efficiency, or do we want to promote safety? And we want safety as much as we can, but we also have to think about, oh gosh, there's a lot of demand out there, and we need to accommodate that demand. We need the capacity to move people efficiently as well. And so oftentimes it's a balance between safety and efficiency. Let me explain what these left turn types are. We see here, like in the case of safety, permissive left turns is typically lower safety than protected, permitted, or protected left turns. In terms of efficiency, protected gives you lower efficiency. The permissive gives you higher efficiency because of better use of the cycle. And in terms of the traffic volumes, permissive doesn't handle large volumes of left turns typically too well. But when you get into protected or protected permitted, you get higher traffic capacity, higher volumes can be passed through an intersection operating one of these other types of left turn control, higher left turn volumes, in a protected or protected permitted type operation than a permissive operation. Let me explain what those terms mean there, just so everybody is on the same page here. So a permitted left turn is the kind of thing you see in a simple two-phase operation. Typically, where all you see are the circular green indications for all the directions. And so that means the left turns can operate, but they're yielding to the oncoming traffic. They're yielding to the oncoming through traffic. So the left turns in this case, have to yield to the oncoming traffic. They're looking for gaps, and when there's an acceptable gap, that's when they go. This is one of the things actually most challenging to young drivers in particular. When you're first learning to drive, you really learn gap acceptance just through experience. You can't really learn it from a book or something like that. And so young drivers in particular have problems with gap acceptance at permitted left turns, and also it's something that seems to show up in older drivers. Many older driver crashes are where they're having problems with gap acceptance at permitted left turns. And so that's why it's particularly way down on the safety scale, if you will, is because some drivers have a real problem with permitted left turns, and you have to be able to see and perceive the oncoming traffic and judge whether or not the gap between vehicles is acceptable, whether you have enough time to get through there. So important thing to think about. So anyhow, that's permitted left turns. Again, all you see is a circular green indication, or now we're seeing the flashing yellow arrow being implemented, and so you don't have any green arrow. All you see is either circular green or flashing yellow arrow, and that's a permitted left turn. Protected permitted is where you will have a green arrow phase where you are protected. No other movements will be conflicting with you, so you can proceed with the expectation you're not going to have a conflict. You do always need to use caution. Some people will run red lights and that kind of stuff. People will step out off the curb when they shouldn't sometimes. But if you have a green arrow on for a left turn, you should not be expecting that kind of stuff. But you should drive cautiously and look for people that aren't following the law. So anyhow, this is the protected portion in the first phase shown here, protected portion of a protected plus permitted. And here again, for the left turns, they would see either a circular green or a flashing yellow arrow to let them know, they can proceed if they desire, but they're yielding to some other movement that's a conflict to them. All right, protected only lefts or protected left turns mean you move on the green arrow in this phase. So you're moving on the green arrow here, and you're not allowed to go here. During the second phase, you would typically see a red arrow. You would expect to see a red arrow. That's protected only or protected left turns. Now, some of the options within these various left turn phasing options or choices that you can make. This is what's called a leading left turn. In this case, since we don't show any permitted left turns here, this is a protected leading left turn. This left turn operates in the protected mode, and it leads, which means it comes before the throughs. Left turns first, throughs second. So it's a leading left turn, in this case protected only. Leading left turn, protected only. This is what's called a lagging left turn. It means the left turns come after the throughs. So left turn phases come after the throughs. It's not something you see very commonly, but there are some locations that do operate with a lagging left turn. So lagging left turns, and in this case again protected only. And then what's called a lead lag operation. One direction leads. This is a leading left turn, and this direction leads, this direction lags. And so you see this kind of operation on some big arterials. They do this primarily to really promote coordination, just based on how the vehicles arrive from the adjacent signals. If this direction, all the traffic from the previous signal arrives earlier than the other direction, you give this guy the lead so as just as people are arriving at the signal, they pass through without stopping. And then the other direction arrives because it's further away or its green time is offset a little bit differently. It arrives a little bit later in the cycle, and so you want to, again, pass, in this case, the left turns, make sure they can pass through the intersection without stopping. And so, again, this kind of thing can be implemented. Typically, it's primarily for progression. There might be other situations where you need to do it just because of the geometry at the intersection. If the intersection is not big enough for this left turn to operate simultaneously with this left turn, if you've got double lefts or triple lefts on one side and double lefts or triple lefts on the other side, there just may not be enough room in the intersection, and so you have to separate the left turn so that this one operates at one part of time and this operates at a separate part of time. That's also the case where you'll hear of an operation called split phase. Split phase, you do all of the eastbound here and all of the westbound here. So run eastbound lefts and throughs and westbound lefts and throughs. And typically, again, that's done for some geometric obstruction you have, or something is prohibiting it in the geometry, or maybe you don't have sight distance. There was one location we looked at a couple years ago in Pasco County that was having some issues, and there was really steep grades approaching the center of the intersection, and you really could not see across the intersection to have permitted operation. You couldn't see the opposing traffic at all, and it was decided, for the side street that we would operate, eastbound in one phase and westbound in a separate phase, just because you really couldn't operate it any other way. It was the most sensible way to make the intersection operate. So again, it's a safety concern, making sure you have the sight distance or the geometry necessary to operate the left turns, that would make you choose split phase or possibly lead lag. All right, we'll look briefly at some of these things in a little more detail here. For permissive left turns, it is required for permissive left turns you have adequate sight distance. You have to be able to see the oncoming traffic that you're yielding to in order to see the gap, accept the gap, and drive through the gap. And so, again, sight distance is critical if you're going to be running permissive left turns. And there has to be adequate gaps in the opposing traffic. If the opposing traffic is operating at capacity, then and there's no adequate gaps, then you might have to upgrade to some kind of protected plus permitted or something like that. Some of the considerations, if you're thinking about permissive left turns, the number of opposing lanes. It varies from place to place, district to district around Florida. Some districts will not do permitted left turns across more than 2 lanes of opposing traffic. So if you have a 6-lane section, just every signal would be protected only. They wouldn't put in protected permissive. In District 7, we've got several locations where you've got 3 or more lanes of opposing traffic. But like I said, other districts, anything over 2, and it's going to be protected only. So, but the number of lanes is a critical thing to consider, again, because you've got to make it all the way across all those lanes and be able to see all the way, all those lanes, what the opposing traffic is that's coming at you. Some of the other things, if you have real high volumes of left turns, again, you may need to upgrade from permissive left turns to something with some protection. Again, the opposing through volume certainly impacts it, as does the opposing traffic speed. If you've got a real high-speed location, that gap closes real fast if you've got 55 or 60 mile an hour traffic. And so selecting the appropriate gap gets a lot more difficult at really high speeds. And again, I mentioned, certainly young, inexperienced drivers have issues with gap acceptance, and older drivers, particularly as people get older, judging the speed of oncoming traffic and just how much gap you've got is a real challenge. Like I said, the elderly population do show up in a lot of angle crashes, or really a left turning crash where they're accepting a gap that's really too small, and they get into an angle crash, a T-bone crash, where they were not able to properly judge the speed of the oncoming traffic. So that's a real consideration as you're deciding what type of left turn protection is. What are the speeds out there? Road user demographics, like I said, if you got a lot of young drivers or a lot of old drivers, then permissive may not be the best thing to do. And also conflicts with pedestrians. And I'll show this a little bit later as well, but if you're looking at the street over across from you looking for a gap, and you're looking for a gap, and you're concentrating on a gap and looking for a gap, you may not see the pedestrian that's crossing over here in the crosswalk. And you see your gap and you hit the gas, go through it, and run right into the pedestrian in the crosswalk. So that's a real issue to think about as well. If you've got lots of pedestrian traffic, then again, you may want to shy away from permissive left turns at that location. Protected plus permitted, again, if you've got real high left turn volumes or you've got some crashes, then maybe you need to upgrade to a protected left turn and have protected, but you still like some of the capacity of the permitted phase as well. So in that case, you might try a protected plus permitted. You still need to make sure if you're doing protected plus permitted that you have sight distance, again, because you're looking down the road looking for a gap in traffic, and so you have to be able to see the oncoming traffic. So sight distance, again, critical if you're going to have the permitted phase as well as the protected. And gaps have to be there if you're going to use it. Sometimes you may need to add some supplemental signing to let people know left turn has to yield on green. This one, I'm not sure where this photo was taken, but it looks like they really needed to let people know, hey, left turns, yield, check it out. So they had a blank out sign put up as well that left turns have to yield on the green indication. They had the static regulatory sign here, but they added the blank out sign as well to let the left turns know, hey, you got to yield to the oncoming traffic. One of the things that can happen with protected plus permitted lefts is what's called a yellow trap, and it is especially something that can show up where you have lead lag operation or where you have lagging lefts. If the lefts aren't tied together where they must occur simultaneously, they can happen if all of the cross-street phases are skipped, and that's something I've seen at some intersections in the early morning or late evening hours. If there's no demand on the cross street, you'll go from Main Street left or the overlap one of the lefts with the throughs, and then go from the through movement or one of the lefts with throughs back to the leading lefts, and the yellow trap can occur there. And it is also something that occurs at T intersections if you don't prohibit U-turns on the direction that doesn't have a leg to left turn into. So it can show up at T intersections as well. And so any permissive turns may create also that pedestrian left turn conflict that I talked about. But let me try to explain the yellow trap a little bit better. So this is an intersection, and we're getting ready to start. We're just going to go through the east-west part of this. You've got a left turn lane in each direction and one through lane in each direction. And so here we start, and our one direction starts off. And we got the green arrow going, so the left turn is protected here, and the left turn's going, and we've got the throughs going simultaneously with that. So, we've got our eastbound lefts and throughs going together. And now, let's say our eastbound lefts are gapping out and about to end. So they show the yellow for that, and then we go to the permitted phase. And when we start, after we clear that left turn, or after we end the protected portion, okay, now we're operating permitted. And so we've got our east and westbound throughs are going. They've got circular green indication, and our left turns are able to go. They're yielding to the oncoming traffic. So, everybody's moving. So our eastbound lefts are yielding to oncoming traffic, and these guys are just flying through the eastbound throughs because they've got their circular green. Similarly, the westbound throughs are flying through here. These guys are yielding to oncoming traffic, and they will make their left turns. Okay, now as we begin to transition to where westbound lefts and throughs will come up. If this goes to yellow, okay, you're standing here in the left turn lane, oh gosh, it goes yellow. Let me creep up into the intersection so when it goes red, I can force my way through there. Well, this guy's got a green indication. He's got green when this goes to yellow. He's just flying through there like nobody's business because green, it was green before, it's green now, just flying through there. If this goes to red and starts up that arrow, this guy says, okay, red, so now I can go. And he starts to go and gets smashed into by somebody that is westbound who says, why did this idiot just run into my green? Well, it's because he thought, as it went from circular green to circular yellow to circular red, that he could just, oh, that's the end of the phase, let me go through here. But this guy saw green while he was having a circular green. He saw green while the guy was in yellow and saw green while the guy is now in red. And so he just says, why did this moron just blow through and right into the middle of my green? He must have run the red light. Well, he thought he was clearing. And this is what the yellow trap is all about. And so as you're making your signal phasing choices, you want to make sure you're avoiding that trap because you've suckered this left turner into the middle of the intersection to get hit, in an angle type crash. And it really is a left turn crash, but it's an angle type crash and severe consequences likely. All right, let's talk about the flashing yellow arrow. We're starting to see more and more of those implemented now. The yellow trap can really be eliminated with the use of the flashing yellow. If you have the flashing yellow that, in the case I just showed, if I back up, instead of going to red while the opposing traffic has green, I could still flash yellow for this left turn while this guy has green. It would eliminate that yellow trap. So I could have this guy, the eastbound left turn, continuing to see flashing yellow while the through that's right beside him sees the red. He still knows by virtue of the flashing yellow that I'm yielding to oncoming traffic, and so flashing yellow really can help solve that problem of the yellow trap if you use your flashing yellow properly. I mentioned the protected permitted lefts versus pedestrian issue, the pedestrian left turn condition. And so again, if you're in this operation where you're yielding to oncoming traffic, you're looking up the road for your gap in traffic, you're looking for a gap, and you're watching the vehicles go by, you see a gap in traffic, and you start to make your left turn maneuver. Well, if you weren't paying attention, you could run into the pedestrian who's in the crosswalk crossing when he's still in his walk or in the flashing don't walk of his pedestrian crossing period, and serious consequences could result again for that pedestrian. He's unprotected and could be very serious for him. And so that's again one of the considerations you have to be thinking about if you're going to be implementing any permitted left turn operation at all. And so if you have lots of pedestrians crossing, then maybe you eliminated the permitted portion of the protected permitted lefts. Again, it's one of the things you have to be aware of and thinking about as you're choosing how should my left turns operate. All right, so what does drive those decisions? As we covered, turning movement counts, how much traffic you have, how many left turns you have there. Coordination with other signals also may impact how you order those phases. The geometry of the intersection often will drive how you order your phases or what phases you choose. How the lanes are assigned. If you have dual left turns or triple left turns, you're not going to do permitted operation. And so, or if you have one lane is left turns only and another lane is shared left through and right, then you're certainly not going to operate that as a permitted operation. That's just not going to be a safe thing at all. Again, you have to maintain sight distance if you have any inclination towards a permitted operation, either permitted only or protected permitted. If you've got anything like that in your mind, you want to make sure you can see so drivers can make a good choice for gap acceptance. And then it's, again, the balance of safety and efficiency. And again, going back to this, we know that protected is much safer, but protected is also a lot less efficient typically. Permissive is much better in terms of efficiency, but safety is much lower. So again, you got to balance those considerations as you're choosing which type of phasing do I want, and which order do I want these phases to appear in. So these are some of the factors there that need to be considered. All right, one more topic I want to just talk about briefly is right turn on red. Right turn on red to be or not to be. There was an article in ITE Journal back in 2003, and it says the driver is typically looking for an oncoming vehicle and a gap in traffic rather than for the pedestrians in the crosswalk. And this is the pedestrian thing I showed. So you've got this right turn right turn versus pedestrian issue, same as the left turn versus pedestrian issue that I showed. And again, the driver is looking typically to his left to make that right turn on red, and he doesn't even see the pedestrians off to his right that might be looking to cross the road. So right turn on red, again, is a big issue, can be a real safety issue if you do have large volumes of pedestrians, something you may need to think about. Right turn on red, there are many times where you do want to prohibit it. Again, if you have lots of right turn versus pedestrian conflicts, and so there's regulatory signs in the MUTCD for doing that. Another situation where you may want to do it is where you have right turns conflicting with U-turns. And back in the day when I was doing a lot of signal design work and creating signal designs, I always, if I had what's called the right turn overlap, where the right turn has a green arrow at the same time this left turn had a green arrow, I always just prohibited the U-turn actually. If I needed that right turn capacity and needed the left turn capacity as well, I always said no U-turn so that these can operate together. If you allow the U-turn simultaneously with the right turn green arrow, then you need to install the R1016 sign, the U-turn yielding to right turn, because again, having a green arrow for the left and a green arrow for the right simultaneously does create some bit of conflict here. And so you want to remind the U-turning vehicle to look for this right turning vehicle who also has a green arrow. So it's something that you would definitely want to consider in that type of operation where you have heavy right turns and they're operating on a green arrow. At the same time, this left turn has a green arrow. You want to either prohibit the U-turns or make sure you install this sign to let people know that the U-turn has to yield to the heavy right turn that also has a green arrow. One of the situations where you may want to prohibit right turn on red is, again, where you don't have adequate sight distance. LOS here is not level of service, it's line of sight. And so this vehicle that's turning right here, if his visibility is blocked by this adjacent vehicle, he can't see this oncoming vehicle that has green while he's got red. And so you would want to prohibit turn on red. So again, geometry and some of the other phasing at the intersection may drive you to prohibit right turn on red at some locations. This is, I believe it's in Michigan, because they use a lot of these illuminated overhead regulatory signs. And so, here, this is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no turn on red. And it's probably because of the skew of the intersection, limited sight distance. But again, they use a lot of these overhead illuminated ones to really stand out at nighttime, and they really stand out well in daytime to prohibit turn on red, largely here, I'm sure, for sight distance restrictions. This is an interesting situation here. This is a roadway, and they have the regulatory sign up here, or at least it looks like it's a variant of the R1011 regulatory sign prohibiting right on red. But they also have an adjacent railroad crossing, and there's a blank out sign that says no right turn at all. No right turn at all. The no right turn symbol comes on when the railroad crossing is active. So when the crossing is closed, the gates are down, this blank out sign is on saying there's no right turns allowed at all, because they don't want to overstack the all the capacity, very short amount of capacity on this cross street here due to the railroad activities. This is up in D.C., Washington, D.C., and so you can see another way to prohibit right turns. They've got advanced sign basically letting you know no turn on red, and overhead signing here. Next to this is a right turn head here, green, yellow, and red arrows for the right turn. And so, again, reminding no turn on red at this location. They have a lot of pedestrian activity here. This is a sign I really don't like a lot, but sometimes you'll see people do this, no right turn on red, sometimes, and they'll spell out 7 to 9 a.m. on school days. I mean, one of the reasons I don't like it is if I'm a tourist, if I'm a visitor from some other area, how do I know if it's a school day or not? And my watch might still be in Eastern time, and this might be in Central time if I'm in Alabama or something. And so, for something like this, I would prefer a blank out sign. If you're only going to do it certain times a day, you can have a blank out sign come on during those hours when you want it. But that's something you can do through the MUTCD. It's in accordance with the manual, is you can do those kind of timed prohibitions. This is a no turn on red blank out sign, and basically this is implemented as a part of leading pedestrian interval, because you can see the vehicles still have red saying no right turn here, but the pedestrians have their walk signal. And so this is how you would implement a leading pedestrian interval to allow the pedestrians to get into the crosswalk so they can be seen, so they have an opportunity to take ownership of the crosswalk before the right turn is released. So again, a good use here of the blank out sign to get the pedestrians safely into the intersection so there's no conflict between the right turns and the pedestrians in the crosswalk. Sometimes people try to run right turn on red out of dual right turn lanes. Again, it's very uncommon, but you can see some folks have done it, and it is possible to do in accordance with the MUTCD. So in this case, you put up the sign no turn on red except from the right lane. So that's telling you this guy can make right turn on red. If you're here on red, you just got to wait till the green comes on. And sometimes it'll be implemented like this, where it'll say no turn on red from this lane. So again, this lane has to stop and wait until the green comes. This lane's able to make right turn on red. All right, well, with that, that's all, folks. I hope you got something out of that. Hope you learned some things you didn't know. And I just want to put in a reminder, if you're PE and once your PDHs, rules are just a few months away, coming up in February, just download the form, email it to me, and we'll get your PDH submitted to the board. Or you can fax it to me, a toll-free fax number listed there. The form's real simple. You fill it out. There's a pull-down menu for each of the Safety Academy topics. Put in your PE number, your name, email address. It takes you just a few seconds to put it together and send it out to me. And if you're interested in your PDH, send them in as quick as you can. It really helps me to get them quickly, and I get them turned around real quick, and you get your certificate, and everybody's happy. Don't bother to try to save them and submit them all at one time. Just, it takes about, like I said before, about 2 minutes at the most to fill out the form. Email it to me, and you're good to go. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
We do have a few questions in the chat, Larry.
Okay.
You should be able to see the chat as the presenter, but I'll go ahead and read the questions out loud. While I do that, let me go ahead and put up the poll as well to see if anybody learned anything here. Was this webinar helpful? Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen and give folks a few minutes to vote. There's a question about countermeasures, which one's most effective and least effective to reduce rear-end collisions at signalized intersections between adding a lane, installing a sign, prohibiting turns, and prior shifting rear-end path. Which is the least effective?
Okay.
Which is effective, just most effective?
Okay. Well, that's a real good question. Certainly one of the things I think that has been very helpful is the use of the retroreflective backplates. And so that wasn't on the list, I don't think, but let's see. Yeah, I've got it up in front of me now. To reduce the rear-end collisions at signalized intersections. Adding a lane typically isn't going to help a whole lot. Really, one of the main things I think for reducing rear-end collisions is going to be make sure your yellow and all red intervals are timed appropriately, and make sure you have good clearance times, because really what happens at many of the rear-end crashes, you got two people following fairly closely, and the signal goes yellow. You know, the person in the front is a very passive driver, and the person following closely behind the driver, the aggressive driver says, "Oh, yellow, hit the gas." But the guy in front of him says, "Oh, yellow, hit the brake." And so, you know, a lot of the rear-end crashes are that kind of thing. And, you know, there's not a real good solution for that kind of crash. But you know, I think the rear-end path, I've never seen anyone really implement it, but if I understand that correctly, you know, you're shifting the path a little bit so that people have to slow down approaching the signal. And, you know, that may be a pretty good thing, because, again, if you can slow down the second driver to the same speed as the driver in front of them, much lower likelihood that they'll end up in that rear-end crash. So I guess the real way to reduce the rear-end crashes is to try to do some speed control, really active speed control, so people are going roughly the same speed. Because, again, you've got somebody going a little faster coming up on the person a little bit slower. If the guy in front hits the brake at the same time the guy in the back, you know, hits the gas, then, you know, rear-end collision's unavoidable there. So I hope that.
If I can add to that, Larry, I would say at an isolated signal, something like dilemma zone detection can go a long way.
Yeah, that's true. A dilemma zone detection, being able to actually extend the yellow a little bit further, could go a long way. But again, if the guy in front is fairly passive, sees the yellow and hits the brake, and the guy following closely behind him sees the yellow and hits the gas, you know, something's got to change there. So I mean, that would be a good thing, dilemma zone protection, and again, just making sure your yellows and all reds are adequate for the speeds people are really driving. And so speed control, keeping everyone close to the same speed, is going to be one of the best things you can do.
You know, from a geometry standpoint, I would say turn lanes help, because a good number of rear-end crashes are just folks that are slowing down to make a right turn on green, where the person behind wants to go through. So that's also helpful, and just access management. You know, if you have your turn lanes, you have less driveways, you have less conflict points, things like that are very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, making sure that turn lane is long enough that, you know, the vehicle can get over out of the through lane into the turn lane at a high enough speed that they're not impeding the guy behind them. So, yeah, that's good.
And you mentioned the reflective backplates. The other one as well with the signals, as far as visibility, is one signal head per approach lane.
Yes.
There are some places that will put them on the lane lines in between, but it's better to have more signals. Maybe a near side signal if you have a very large intersection, increases the visibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good place to search for things like that as well is the crash reduction factor countermeasure clearinghouse.
Right.
If you Google the CMF clearinghouse and search for rear-end crash reduction at signalized intersections, you may get some quantitative, you know, this is the percentage expected reduction for different types of countermeasures. It's an interesting question. Real quick on screen, I put the answers to your poll there. It looks like there's a good number of people that learned a lot or leered a lot. I'm sorry, I typed that very quickly right before the presentation. 58% said it was a good refresher. Only 6% said that they knew everything, and no one fell asleep during the presentation, or they're still sleeping and didn't see the poll.
Okay.
So, we're not sure on that one. Another question from chat. How do you best accommodate right turn on red on triple right turn lanes?
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing double or triple right turn lanes, then again, you're going to use one of those signs that said basically right turn on red from the outside lane only. And the reason you do that is if you let people from other lanes start doing it as well, what they're going to do is block the visibility of the one in the outside. And so typically, yeah, where you have double or triple rights, you would want to identify the outside right turn lane as the one using or available to use right turn on red. I know, like particularly right there at the District 7 headquarters at the McKinley-Fowler intersection, they have dual rights there, and they allow right turn on red from both lanes on at that intersection. It's a little, I don't know, to me it's a little scary, a little iffy, because again, if the inside right turn lane wants to start going, and especially sometimes you see the Pepsi trucks making those right turns there coming out of that Pepsi distribution center, they're making the right turn. If they're in the inside right turn lane, the guy on the outside right turn lane has no chance of being able to see it all. And so it can get kind of iffy, but it seems to work okay there. I hadn't seen any crashes there or any reports of crashes like that with the right turns, making those right turns on red. So, but I would typically, especially if I was into triple rights, I'd put the sign up to say, just the outside lane can make the right turn on red.
Important distinction too, I believe. I don't know what other states, but I know in the state of Florida, a right red arrow, you're allowed to make a right turn on red. So you're only not allowed to turn on red if there's a sign prohibiting the movement. What they actually did at McKinley there at the Fowler also, because of the students, and it's across the street from the university, there's a blank out, no right turn on red, that's pedestrian actuated. Mm-hmm. So to reduce the conflicts with the peds, if someone pushes the button, cars are not allowed to make a right turn on red, which is a neat approach as well.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question about one of the last slides there, with the dual right turn scenario of the last slide. Is the left right turn always a protected movement? You can go back one slide.
Yeah, let me back up one slide here. Oops. Oops.
I guess.
Is it always a protected movement? That's a real good question. It would tend to be, I would think. Although, yeah, I mean, if I were to do it, I would make it a protected movement because, again, if the inside right turn lane, this lane here, if you're making this right turn simultaneously with these people, you probably could not see the pedestrians. You probably will not have good visibility of pedestrians. And so you've got a vehicle that's making this right turn from the outside lane, and he's blocking your visibility of the pedestrian that might be crossing just in front of him here. So I would tend to make it protected only to mainly protect the pedestrians.
There's a question about flashing mode. Someone would like a little bit more discussion about some of the safety concerns with having signals flash at night.
Yeah, the nighttime flash really was something that was popular back when, in the 70s and early 80s, when there was a whole lot of concern about energy prices and just saving energy and that kind of stuff. And so, again, at that time, all the signals were, each indication was a 135-watt bulb, and so you're burning lots and lots of electricity running those things at night when you don't have much traffic. And oftentimes, if the signal's just in flashing yellow, it's treated as a green, and it's not about to go yellow or red on you. And so it tended to promote higher speeds along the corridor because you have zero expectation that it's going to come out of flashing yellow and suddenly go to yellow and then red, because it's just going to be flashing for several more hours. And so people would tend to drive pretty fast. And so they did a lot of studies, and studies have shown that the corridors typically are safer staying in green, yellow, red operation 24 hours a day, just because you don't have that late night period where you have some impaired drivers out there and they're driving very fast. And so you have all the things working against you really when you flash them at night. And again, nowadays that we have LED indications, you're not burning too much power anyhow, so it's just a lot of safety concerns at those intersections when you are flashing them at night, and a lot of that does go away when you go into full green, yellow, red operation. I mean, signals sometimes do go into flash, for other reasons. When there's a conflict or something unusual at the signal, by default, they will go into a flashing mode. But again, the late night flash is something really that studies have shown it's much safer to avoid the late night flash than to put signals in late night flash.
Something that municipalities do as well. I mean, when the signal would have gone to flash, it's just greatly reduced the cycle length, so that from the side street you're not sitting there waiting for 2 minutes for the signal to come back around.
Yeah.
If that's kind of a concern. I mean, because you've got traffic signals at 6-lane divided highways, and it's just kind of dangerous to make a direct left without the signal assigning right away.
I saw, I got the questions up here. I see, what is the technical name for the pause when traffic light turns red and a certain amount before the light turns green for the next? Yeah, that's the all red interval. At the end of every phase, when you go from green to yellow, there should be now an all red interval, and it varies based on primarily the width of the intersection and the speed. So, a real wide intersection will typically have a longer all red than a real narrow approach. But again, it's also based on the speed, because the all red is really designed to get the vehicle that entered the intersection in the last millisecond of yellow to the other side of the intersection before the conflicting traffic is released. So I hope that answered that question. All right. Was there anything else? All right. I see Camille Matthews has her hand up. Anything? Yeah.
Camille. Let's see.
So if you have a question, Camille, if you could type it in the chat pod. Well, do you see anything else, Anthony?
I do not see any other questions coming in on the chat. Suppose we can end the recording and hang out for a few minutes to see if any stragglers type any questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and I guess this ends our webinar.